Is it good to hold on sealed product? Violet is asking in the chat.
Hold on, sealed product? No, not for modern sealed product. The thing about sealed product is that they can always, first off, they can always print more. And you have to remember that compared to how things were back then, like GX, original era, print runs are massive. They, the people, Konami knows, and other card game manufacturers know, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, what have you. They know that their games are very popular, and therefore they print a lot of product. Now, this is where Yu-Gi-Oh is a little bit different. Other games use what's called a print to demand model. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't do that, but I mean that's a whole other can of worms in and of itself. But generally, sealed product is not a good hold. I mean, look at even back to Zexal or Arc V. Like, if I go online, sure, box prices on Duelist Alliance they did go up, but who's buying it? Your sales rates on old soda product are honestly pretty bad, unless they're really really old. Which I mean, I'm sure none of us have sealed Legend of Blue Eye sitting around. So I mean, that's still product for you. You're just kind of sitting there and you're kind of hoping and praying that your box goes up. And even if it does, then you have to find a buyer. And in this day and age, and for a long time now, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Yu-Gi-Oh Soul product has been mainly been driven by the meta. That's what core sets are there for. They're to sell the meta. And once they essentially rotate out, when they stop being meta, no one wants to buy it anymore. I mean, who wants to go back and buy something from 2019? Who wants to go back and buy Rising Rampage? Answer me that. Still got good cards in it. It's got Appaloosa. You got the Tenyis. But who's buying it? Nobody.
Interesting thing about old sealed product. So the LOB, if you find a first edition LOB Portuguese that isn't from, I can't even remember what year LOB came out, but that was actually almost like a rerun. They reprinted it as a first ed in Portuguese many, many years later. So that even though it's like first ed, it's not from when LOB first dropped.
This is why Portuguese is worth so little compared to the rest of the market.
So if you're looking at buying like vintage sets, always bear in mind that even though it says first edition, it might not be from when the set was first ran.
For the most part, it is true that if it's first edition, actually is from the first. There are some corner case situations like Portuguese, but for the main languages that Yu-Gi-Oh is printed in, whether that be English, German, Italian, first ed actually does mean first ed for the most part.
Mm.
But I mean, if I guess that's the next thing about vintage. I don't personally believe in vintage because think about it. Vintage is one of the hardest things to move. It is and if anything, just cards in general are a highly speculative asset. You have to remember this. These cards are only worth value because people put value on them. Compared to stock, which could hypothetically go up, which could hypothetically be productive, or stock in or a company or a company's assets, Yu-Gi-Oh cards don't create anything. I mean, I own some expensive cards. I mean, I have like Ghost Rares, but what do those Ghost Rares do? They just sit there. They don't do anything, right? They're non-productive assets. All I can do is hope and pray that down the line, someone is willing to pay more for it than I paid. So while you're sitting there waiting for your money that you poured into vintage cards, whether they be vintage single cards or vintage seal product, you're just sitting and hoping for it to accrue value, and it's not even real value. It's just paper value when you think about it. And when you're eventually ready to cash out, you have to try and find a buyer, and sometimes that takes years. The number of people who are actually like buying old vintage stuff is quite small. Especially, and this is where we get into the really technical market stuff. The biggest thing to remember when it comes to long-term holds is that index funds will usually beat the market. Will usually be the market standard. Very rarely will any other kind of asset beat the S&P 500. Do you guys know what that is? Okay, decent amount of people. Okay, so this is the stock market now. So we're drifting a little bit away from Yu-Gi-Oh, but still relevant to this discussion. I can circle back to Yu-Gi-Oh in a bit. So the S&P 500 is a collection of 500 companies, as the name would imply, all across all sorts of different sectors of the economy. You know, consumer goods, travel, what have you. So when you invest money into an index fund like the S&P 500, you are essentially buying a very tiny bit of 500 different companies. So because these index funds are so diversified, even when the economy takes a downturn, they usually hold value. So circling back to Yu-Gi-Oh, the reason why I'd say I don't believe in vintage is because while your vintage cards will probably go up in value over time, because I mean they're not being printed more, They're the gains you see in the vintage market usually don't beat the market average of say the Dow Jones or the S&P 500. So you're putting money into a much riskier market, because remember that vintage cards are a much riskier market than the stock market, which has decades of data to back it up. And for what? You're not seeing more gains. The only benefit you're getting out of putting money into vintage cards over the stock market is that you can hold nice cardboard. I mean, that's basically the long and short of why I don't believe in vintage. I mean, I do hold some things, like, again, the whole diversification. Let's see, is like, what's the point when you like cardboard? The stock market can be a very risky game. Answering Violet's question is that the thing is that there's a test. It's called the Series 8 test, and if you have not passed this test, you do not pay broker rates on stocks, nor can you really do what most privileged individuals can do. This is why Wall Street is so disconnected from the rest of the population. I mean, technically, yes, you could say that it is better to put your money into the stock market instead of Yu-Gi-Oh! That is definitely a very valid argument, but it's less fun, I'll tell you that. You're just the stock market, you're just looking at a graph all day.
Also, at the end of the day, you could probably control the Yu-Gi-Oh! Market a lot easier than the whole, stock market.
Entirely true. That is a very good point. So you could argue that putting your money in the stock market is a safer move, but it is possible to make a lot of money through modern Yu-Gi-Oh! than if you're taking that money and invest it. Especially considering, I don't know if you guys heard about the whole Robinhood scandal. It really brought to light what exactly Robinhood is. There exists two different stock prices. I don't know, like when you Google a stock price, that's what the Wall Street pays. That's not what you pay. If you were to go on Robinhood or Charles Schwab or whatever other investment bank you want to go through, you have to pay extra because you are what's called a retail investor. So you don't pay that price. You pay a little bit more for that stock. Well, John, the stock market crashed yesterday is a very inaccurate statement. The entire market didn't crash. I know they say that sometimes like something is up or something is down, but for the most part, the whole market doesn't usually crash unless something catastrophic happens. And I'm pretty sure if the whole stock market crashed, we'd be seeing a lot more hubbub about it on the news. So, I mean, it's very inaccurate to say that the stock market crashed because usually it didn't. The market as a whole very rarely takes a nosedive. I mean, it has. Don't get me wrong. It has 2008 and 2009, and then the Great Depression, all that fun stuff. But for the most part, the whole entire market doesn't just crash. Let's see. How do you get the market?
Yeah, there you go.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna read out his question.
Okay, let's see. How do you get the Market Watch info before the Market Watch channels release it? I mean, think about it. What do Market Watch videos show? They show TCG Player and eBay listings. That information you could have found on your own. So technically, there really isn't a way to get the Market Watch info before they release it, unless you are just pouring over TCG Player data all the time, which I do, which sometimes you have to do, which I sometimes do. Whenever I buy a case of a set, I look at the prices and I notice the trends. I keep on showing what goes up, what goes down. That's like the Market Watch info isn't privileged information for the most part. It's info you could have found on your own. They just did the work of compiling it into a nice little 10-minute video for you. So it's always there for you. You just have to be willing to put in the work to get it. Or you could wait for it to be spoon-fed to you by a Market Watch YouTuber, but by that point, it's probably too late.
This is somewhere where like sites like TCG Player and Card Market do have some value because they have obviously their graphs which show the data of a card going up or down in price depending on the week and day, etc. So you can sort of like map out some patterns, but it's just like Rex said, you have to basically watch these sites 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who have written algorithms that give them real-time updates on card prices, just like the stock market. Some people are that dedicated.
What do you think of graded cards? I know like those are big in Magic and Pokemon. I of course vintage Yu-Gi-Oh graded cards are also insanely priced, but do you think that's worth doing with modern cards or getting into that way, like cracking open packs or buying the singles and then sending them off to get graded and then sell them at a higher price that way?
No.
Yeah, no.
Grading modern cards is a losing game because the population. Here's the difference. Take a card from LOB Blue Eyes. So you have the initial population, which wasn't that high because Konami didn't know if Yu-Gi-Oh was going to take off or not, so they didn't print that much to begin with. And then over 20 odd years, think about how many got destroyed by kids washing them, by them being thrown in the garbage can. Like, think about how in 20 years, how many of those Blue Eyes got destroyed compared to now. Nowadays, everyone keeps their cards sleeved. Everyone keeps them like in almost pristine condition. We saw this happen with sports cards, and it's happening with Yu-Gi-Oh now. Grading modern cards is not worth it. It really isn't,
And
especially considering that PSA just upped their prices.
Even if you do keep it pristine, but you still play with it, if you play with a card, it's not going to be a 10, very likely, because you need or a 9.
Also have to remember that people have this misconception that a card comes out of a pack of PSA 10. That is absolutely not true. Cards come out of like pack fresh is PSA 8. For it to be a PSA 9 or 10, it has to be something really special. It really does. There's
Even
a reason
like
why
the slightest like miscut or something on a perfect card can drop you a whole decimal point just because it's off like by a couple of millimeters at least.
Don't forget that PSA doesn't do decimals. Only BGS does decimals. They go by 0.5,
yeah.
and then PSA only does hard numbers. So
yeah,
I hear people brag to get PSA 10. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. Maybe they know one of the graders. I can't really confirm that. But all right, I'm gonna put this post up now. This is why PSA isn't worth it. Look at these prices. Look at value. $20 a card. And considering that the vast majority of expensive cards in modern Yu-Gi-Oh are meta relevant, who the heck wants a graded Pot of Prosperity? What purpose does that serve? Nothing.
There's no collector's market for it.
Exactly. So grading modern cards is really not worth it. I mean, there are some rare exceptions. There is definitely a case to be made that maybe grading, say, 10,000 Dragon is worth it. Maybe that is. But for the most part...
a Ghost Rare Ra, if it's like really, really nice.
Yes, because I mean, yeah, there were the whole production issues with that whole other can of worms there, but...
Yeah. Oh, here's a question that this is something I personally struggle with. How would you value miscut or misprinted cards that are fresh? So we're not talking about something that has like a market value already, like something's new, like a proper, say, like open a pack and it was Pot of Prosperity with, I don't know, pick a Tri-Brigade name, something that hasn't been in the market before.
So a mistaken printing, misprints.
Yeah.
Misprints are very difficult to value for the most part. I mean, it definitely depends on the severity of the misprint is definitely a big thing. Now, this is the biggest misconception. Crimps on the pack from the pack sealer are not considered a misprint. Those are just considered damage.
Mm-hmm.
And if the printer rolled it, sometimes you see those too. Also not a misprint. It's unfortunate, but I mean, that's kind of that market. There is a misprint there's a misprint for collectors Facebook group, and they are much better at value misprints than me. But for the most part, it's really just finding someone to buy and then just kind of haggling out a price. Generally, if you can find cards from the same set with a similar misprint, that's how you kind of go off it, because very rarely will you find a card exactly misprinted the way that you have it.
Unless it's like what set was it? I have a load. The Legendary Fisherman Rare, it has like the Reinforcement of the Army name. That's a very common misprint because that whole set all its rares were messed up with their name stamps.
Interesting.
I can't remember what set it was now.
Was it an old set?
Yeah, I can't remember which one it was now. Actually, it's kind of annoying.
That is definitely interesting. There were some sets where, like, look at Maximum Gold. There were some crazy misprints in Maximum Gold, like with the gold bars all over the card with the unreadable text. Some of those did sell for a lot, but I guess the big thing about misprints is that you are mostly appealing to a very small niche of collectors. So, and remember, and also for misprints, even if you have an old misprint, PSA calls that damage. PSA calls any form of misprint damage. So that's definitely so that's why you never see graded misprints, except for the only exception to the rule is the Ghost Rare, Chaos Neos and Rainbow Dragon that have the pictures and the name swap. That is the only misprint in history that PSA did not call damaged. That's the only one they respect. But
another little just interesting thing: if you pull a damaged money card, and I mean like really damaged out of a pack, Konami can and actually will, if you I think contact them, will replace that card.
They may replace the card. There are times where they have and they have not replaced missing cards or damaged cards out of pack. It is definitely possible. Konami's customer service is not gonna lie, not the greatest. So it's kind of a 50-50 shot if you actually do get your card replaced. I have heard stories of people getting damaged cards out of packs, and then the Konami said sucks to be you. And then I've heard stories of them saying that, okay, that was a mess up on our part, we're going to fix them. It really depends.
One of the TTTs that we pulled was 3 cards stuck together. We sent that off, and they managed to send us a TTT back, which was nice.
Yeah. The big thing about sending cards back to Konami is proving that it was that the damage is their fault and not your fault. That's the big thing. Because like for example, Edgeware, like if your card comes out of the pack with Edgeware, which does happen for certain sets, you're never going to get that replaced. They're just going to say that's your fault. What would be a good place to start vending? Locals. That was where I got started. That's where a lot of vendors get started. You start vending at locals. You just find you know the players there. You know what they want. You know what they're into. Start vending at locals. And I mean, obviously that's a little bit difficult right now, but I would say that you definitely don't want to start on TCG Player or eBay or one of those official platforms. You don't want to start there. That you will not make it there because
it's a very flooded market.
It's a very flooded market. It's a very bloated market. And why would unless you're offering a crazy low price to the point where you might even be losing money, why would I go to you, a new seller with no rating, or the guy on TCG Player with 10,000 plus completed sales? So by far the best place to start vending is locals. Obviously not I mean that might not be possible for people right now given our current situation. So if not locals, honestly Discord is a pretty good place. I legitimately started vending on Discord last year. Before the pandemic, I was selling exclusively in person, because I didn't want to have to deal with shipping. But now obviously shutdowns happen, and then I realized that, I have to adapt, and this is it. This is how I'm going to make money. So that's how we got here.